Dad said, "I have found a bride for you," and the world inside my chest trembled like a newborn dawn. A quiet breeze passed through the courtyard of my heart, as if destiny itself had written a letter and placed it in my hands. His voice was steady, yet filled with a gentle weight, as though each word carried years of prayers, as though he had searched through deserts and stars, until a name finally rested peacefully on his tongue. I looked at him with the eyes of a son, who had walked through storms and sunshine under his shade, a son whose heart had broken and healed 1,000 times, yet still trusted the wisdom of his father's steps. He smiled the way only fathers smile, half prophecy, half memory, as if he saw my future more clearly than I could see the present. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he always had. He sat beside me, placing his hand on my shoulder. Old warmth meeting young uncertainty, and said, "My son, you will not walk alone anymore," and the sentence echoed like soft thunder in my soul. I felt the universe shift, as if the stars whispered her name to one another, as if the air carried a fragrance that didn't belong to the room, a fragrance meant only for the man she would marry. Dad told me, "She is gentle, she is kind, and her heart is stitched with respect and light." His words painted an unseen portrait, and I tried to imagine the shape of her smile. Was she somewhere near thinking of me too? Or was she unaware that her destiny was already being spoken aloud in a distant home? Did the wind carry the news to her before it reached me? I wondered if she loved the rain or the stars, if she cried easily or held her storms inside, if her dreams glowed like lanterns in the night, or rested softly beneath her eyelashes. Dad watched me quietly, as though reading every question behind my silence, every spark of hope, every shadow of doubt. And he said, "Trust me, my son. This is good." His words settled like petals on a still lake, soft, certain, steady, the kind of certainty only a father can offer, the kind of blessing that reshapes a man's entire fate. My heart was no longer mine alone. It leaned forward, reaching for a future unseen, reaching for a woman whose voice I hadn't heard, whose eyes I hadn't met, yet whose presence already felt written into my heartbeat. Dad spoke again, this time softer. "There comes a time in every man's life when love must be chosen not by the eyes, but by the wisdom that walks before him." And I knew he was right. For years he had protected me from storms, held me when I broke, lifted me when I fell. And now he was guiding me into a new season, a season where love would not just be felt, it would be built. My chest filled with a strange new light, a quiet readiness I had never known, as though the path ahead had finally cleared, as though the gates of tomorrow had opened gently. Dad's eyes held stories I had never heard, choices he had made long before I was born, promises he had kept even when the world was heavy, and now he offered me the fruit of those promises. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "You deserve happiness, my son," and the words pierced me deeper than any sword ever could. Not with pain, but with a warmth that felt like a sunrise wrapping itself around my bones. The night outside was quiet, but inside my heart, 1,000 stars awakened, like an orchestra tuning its instruments before the symphony begins. I closed my eyes just for a moment, and in that darkness I saw her. Not her face, not her form, but the idea of her, the presence of her. The soul meant to walk beside mine. I breathed slowly, as if afraid the moment might escape, as if the future might slip through my fingers if I didn't hold this feeling gently. Dad said, "We will meet her family soon," and the words painted tomorrow in colors I had never seen before, soft, trembling, beautiful. A chapter was opening, a chapter I had not written, a chapter destiny had prepared quietly, while I was busy searching for meaning in the wrong corners of life, and now that meaning approached quietly, carried in the simple sentence, "I have found a bride for you." That night felt different, as if the moon leaned a little closer, as if the sky listened more carefully to every breath I took. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, but my mind wandered into rooms, filled with questions I had never asked before. Who was she? What dreams carried her through her nights? What fears hid behind her quiet moments? Every thought formed a delicate thread, weaving a tapestry of imagination around a woman I had never met. Was she somewhere awake too, wondering about the man her father chose for her? Did she sit by her window, pressing her palm against the cool glass, thinking of a stranger who might soon become her world? The idea warmed me, not with passion, but with gentleness, the kind that grows slow and steady, like dawn rising inch by inch over a silent desert. I didn't fear love, but I feared breaking someone's heart, if I wasn't enough. And Dad somehow sensed that fear, even when I hadn't spoken a word. By morning, he sat beside me again, pouring tea for both of us, his hands as steady as the mountains he carried within him. He said, "My son, marriage is not about perfection. It is about patience, kindness, and the courage to grow." His words were lanterns, lighting the corners of my uncertainty. He told me that her family was kind, quiet people who believed in sincerity, people who valued respect over noise, loyalty over wealth, humility over pride. And hearing that felt like a blessing, a calm river running through a restless heart. Dad said she was educated, but not arrogant, confident, but not loud, kind, but not naive, soft-hearted, but not weak. Each word painted her more clearly, like an artist adding strokes to a portrait waiting to breathe. I asked him, "Dad, does she know about me yet?" And he smiled gently, a smile that carried decades of understanding. He replied, "She knows," and she did not say no. Those words struck my heart like wind chimes, soft yet resonant, as if destiny had whispered agreement. Through her silence, I felt something shift inside me then, not excitement, not nervousness, but acceptance, a peaceful acceptance, that perhaps this path was meant for me. Dad continued, telling me about her love for books, how she wrote poetry in the quiet hours of dawn, how she believed that kindness was the first language every soul should learn. The poet, a gentle heart, a woman who loved sunrise more than applause. The thought softened me, like rain falling on long, thirsty earth. I wondered what her voice would sound like. If it carried warmth, if it carried shyness, if it carried stories she never shared with anyone else. And I wondered if that voice would someday call my name, with affection, with trust, with the quiet truth of companionship. Dad watched me carefully as he sipped his tea, and finally he said, "My son, sometimes Allah writes two souls in the same sentence, long before they ever meet." His words were a knot of wisdom I could feel tightening gently into my heart. He told me her parents believed that marriage is not a transaction. It is a merging of duos, two families tying their prayers together in one rope of hope. And I felt grateful that Dad had chosen a family whose values resonated with ours, whose vision of life walked parallel to ours. He told me she cared for her mother, helped her father with small tasks, never complained, never demanded, never placed her desires above the comfort of her home. A woman of grace, not by words, but by deeds. I felt the rise of respect before the rise of love, and perhaps that is the right order for a man to begin with. I thought about how she must have grown, how she must have carried unspoken prayers inside her, waiting for the right man to answer them. And I asked myself a question I had never asked before. Am I ready to be someone's answered prayer? The question lingered, echoing softly in the chambers of my chest. Dad put down his cup, looked into my eyes with the depth of a father who had lived through storms I had never known, and said, "You are ready, my son. You just needed to hear it." His confidence steadied me, like the touch of earth beneath unsteady feet. He told me the meeting would be soon, in a calm home filled with warm smiles and genuine intentions, and suddenly the future felt real. Not imagined, not distant, not a story told through dreams, but real. Tangible, approaching with quiet footsteps. I breathed deeply, feeling responsibility settle over me, like a cloak woven of hope, gratitude, uncertainty, and a strange anticipation I could not yet name. And as Dad stood up, his hand briefly touching my shoulder again, I realized something simple yet powerful. That sometimes a man becomes wiser the moment he accepts that life is larger than his own loneliness. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer. For her, for me, for us, for whatever story awaited. Under the gaze of the one who writes all destinies, and the world felt softer, as if the future smiled gently from behind a closed door. The day came quietly, as if the sun itself had softened its light. to match the trembling pulse inside me. We drove to her home, the streets familiar yet unfamiliar, every corner seeming to hold secrets I had not yet learned. Dad kept talking softly, sharing stories about patience and honor, reminding me that respect is the foundation upon which love can grow. I nodded, but my thoughts kept drifting to the woman I was about to meet, the one whose name had been spoken with hope and blessing in my father's voice. Her home appeared, a gentle house, walls painted with the quiet dignity of years, doors open to welcome honesty, windows wide enough to let kindness enter. We were greeted by her parents, warm smiles and careful eyes that studied me, but not harshly, only seeking to understand. Her mother's hands shook slightly as she let us in, and I realized that a woman who had never seen me carried both hope and fear for the man her daughter would marry. Her father spoke with calm authority, words measured, yet filled with unspoken warmth, a man who seemed to carry mountains inside him, and yet walked softly among flowers. And then she appeared, not with grandeur, not with jewels or perfumes, but with a quiet light that seemed to belong to someone who had learned patience, who had understood the silence between stars. Her eyes met mine, briefly, softly, and the world did not tremble, but it shifted, just a little, enough for me to notice that life had changed without my asking. She smiled, a slow, unassuming smile, the kind that carries more honesty than any words could ever hold. I noticed how she stood, the gentle curve of her posture, the way her hands held themselves, calm and yet full of unspoken strength. I felt respect rise before anything else. Love would come, but respect planted itself first, like roots that promised growth. Dad spoke first, introducing me as his son and sharing the simple story of our family. I spoke next, words chosen carefully, trying to match the quiet dignity she carried. She listened, and in her silence, I found understanding. We spoke about small things, the weather, books we liked, the way our mornings began, and each sentence felt like a thread, weaving a fragile connection. Her parents watched, smiles softening, eyes telling me, "See, she is sincere. She is patient." Time slowed. Moments stretched like soft fabric between us, and I realized that life sometimes moves in the quiet spaces between words. I asked her gently, "What brings you happiness?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Peace, honesty, moments shared quietly," and something inside me stirred. Because that is exactly what I had always sought, without knowing it. Dad's hand touched my shoulder again, a silent reminder that patience matters, that respect builds what passion cannot. We spoke of hopes, but never rushed the heart. We spoke of dreams, but measured them against reality. And slowly, like dawn rising quietly over the horizon, I felt the stirrings of connection, a bond built not on desire alone, but on sincerity and the willingness to walk together. Her smile lingered in my thoughts, even after we left, like a soft echo of something eternal. Dad said nothing, but I could feel his satisfaction, the gentle pride of a father who had chosen well and now watched the first sparks of understanding light up between two hearts. That night I sat alone, thinking of her face, her calm eyes, her measured voice. I realized that love, real love, did not always arrive as fire. Sometimes it came as a quiet river, steady and patient, carving its path through the heart, without the need for chaos. I whispered a prayer for her, for our meeting, for the journey that lay ahead, asking only for guidance, patience, and the courage to honor what had been given to me. And as sleep finally approached, I felt a strange peace settle inside, like the calm after a long journey through uncertain storms. Tomorrow, I knew, would hold more conversations, more questions, more moments of learning who she was. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply feel the first gentle touch of possibility, the first soft steps of a story that had already begun with the words my father had spoken. "I have found a bride for you." Morning came like a soft promise, painting gold on the edges of the room. I dressed carefully, not for anyone else, but for the weight of a moment that already felt sacred. Dad's presence was steady beside me, a reminder that guidance was more than words. It was the quiet strength of someone who had walked life's paths. "We will go to her home again," he said gently. "And today you may speak more freely. Remember, my son, listen as much as you speak." I nodded, though my heart beat like restless wings. It was not fear, not entirely, but the tremor of first encounters that carry the weight of future stories. The house greeted us like an old friend, warm and inviting, filled with the gentle sounds of life, soft laughter, the clinking of dishes, and the occasional whisper of wind through curtains. Her eyes found mine the moment I entered, and I felt the familiar quiet pull, as if some invisible thread had drawn me closer without thought or choice. We exchanged greetings, simple and respectful, yet laden with the gravity of two lives beginning to touch. Her father spoke first, asking questions that measured heart as much as mind, and I answered with honesty, because there was no other way to meet this moment. Her mother watched silently, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips, and I sensed approval, even before it was spoken aloud. And then finally she spoke to me, not formally, not stiffly, but naturally with the quiet cadence of someone who had thought about kindness, even before it became necessary. Her words were soft, yet each carried weight, like a feather landing on a scale, that measured respect, understanding, and sincerity. We spoke of dreams, not as grand castles or distant stars, but of small joys, morning tea, a walk in the garden, quiet conversations at dusk. Her eyes glimmered when she spoke, not with pretense, but with the spark of someone who believed that life could be beautiful if hearts were aligned. I noticed the way she listened, truly listened, not just to my words, but to the pauses between them. The sighs I did not realize escaped me, and I felt a shift inside. Subtle, quiet, yet undeniable, a connection being carved, thread by careful thread, between two souls meeting, for the first time but not for the last. Dad watched from the corner, a quiet guardian, his eyes reflecting both hope and certainty, and I realized then how deeply he had believed that this union could hold strength. Before we even knew each other fully, we shared small laughter, a stumble over words, a gentle teasing, the kind that comes from honesty, not forced humor. I noticed her hands, delicate yet purposeful, the way she moved objects as if to respect them, the way she gestured while speaking, painting small, invisible pictures in the air. Her presence was calming, not demanding, not loud, but filled with an inner balance that made the room feel lighter, the air easier to breathe. We spoke of books, of poetry, and I discovered a mind that mirrored my own in its quiet appreciation of subtle beauty. I realized that love could begin, not with passion or instant attraction, but with admiration, respect, and patience. And so I listened, truly listened, while the world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter of a story that had already begun. The moment my father had spoken those words, her parents smiled. When they saw our easy conversation, their hearts easing, because they too had prayed for someone who would honor their daughter. We moved through the afternoon slowly, like rivers carving gentle paths through the earth. No rush, no expectation, only discovery, only the beginning of understanding. At one point she excused herself, and I noticed the small details of her absence, the subtle quiet that remained, like a space reserved for something precious. When she returned, I felt the pull again, a quiet gravity that was not demanding, but unavoidable. Dad leaned slightly toward me, a small nod of encouragement, and I knew that this was the first of many moments in which patience and sincerity would shape the foundation of our lives. The day passed like a soft song, each hour a gentle note, each word a chord, until the sun began its descent, and the house was bathed in warm, golden light. I looked at her then, really looked, and felt the quiet truth settle in my chest, that this meeting was the first step toward something neither of us could yet name, but both could feel. We bid farewell politely, but the goodbyes were soft, like promises whispered across a distance, promises of patience, of learning, of time. On the way home, I was silent. Dad did not need to speak. His hand on my shoulder was enough to say, "You are ready. You are beginning." And that night, I wrote in my heart, not with ink, but with the quiet understanding that love, in its truest form, grows slowly. steadily, like a river carving canyons over centuries. The journey had begun, and with each step, I realized that what mattered most was not the speed of connection, but the depth of sincerity that anchored it.